Ellis to base. Landing, where are you?
Still under the tree.
What the? So am I.
What? Are we talking about the same tree? White, leafless, black vines all over?
Yeah, that's the one.
Well, look, this doesn't make sense. All of this. It's just ridiculous. God damn it, Ellis. It was a mistake letting you come here. You wanted to redeem yourself. I get it. And I wanted to help, but this is too much for you. You're not thinking straight.
Hey, don't talk to me like I'm crazy!
Wow, did you guys see that old tree?
Blair Witch is a psychological first-person horror game about a man and his dog who get lost searching for a missing boy in the infamous woods in Burkittsville, Maryland. This review will contain spoilers.
When they finally caught her, they hanged her on one of those trees.
Atmosphere. The opening moments of the game are fairly light-hearted even when the other members of the search party are talking about the legend of the Blair Witch. Everyone is joking about, but the tone changes quite quickly as the radio chatter dies down and the sun fades from sight. The game seems lonelier and emptier, and this forest certainly has its moods. Radiant and beautiful, murky and mysterious, and then dark and lonely. But the whole game I felt like I was waiting for something. Everything was set up, the music played these harrowing pieces, the forest was dark and empty, but these weird and confusing events started taking place and suddenly the immersion is totally broken for me. After the first hour had gone, there was only a few brief moments where the atmosphere of the game was really noticeable. My biggest gripe against the game was how long it dragged out certain sections and how often I was ripped out of a spooky forest to relive war trauma or bad interactions with his girlfriend. Everything that could distract you from where you were did, be it the reading the texts and chatting to Jess on the phone or my furry comrade Bullet the service dog rolling around in the leaves and barking 2 feet away from me. The game just did not stay consistent. No Harry Masons.
Yeah, ever since they found those tapes, it's the first place we look.
Alright, boys, let's talk and more searching.
Scares. The game alternates between traditional jump scares and being weird. There were 2 main types of enemies, the tree people who you could defeat by shining your flashlight on them, just like Alan Wake. At first they were pretty frightening, but once you understand what you have to do, they just become an inconvenience. Later in the game, in the iconic house in the forest, there was another type of enemy that was genuinely frightening until it became overused. The camcorder you find reveals them as glowing red on its small screen, but you can't point your flashlight at them because that enrages them and then you die. However, in the final part of the game, player character Ellis ties his flashlight to his camera, so you have to turn both off so you don't anger these things, and then you can't see. It seemed like the only option I had was to bump into the walls in pitch black darkness and die a few times until I made it out of that area. It was just irritating. The jump scares were used pretty sparingly and most of them didn't feel too cheap. The most frightening part of the game for me was the foggy forest with things running around in the low visibility and using the camcorder to identify monsters and avoid triggering them like I was walking around a minefield blindfolded. The moments where Bullet leaves Ellis and what I'm assuming is his PTSD strikes were alarming to begin with because I thought I would die, but then it was just over and nothing became of it. The weird events were just par for the course because that's what Bloober Team do, and there are other games like Observer this worked fine, but it feels crammed into this. Suddenly transitioning from day to night and things changing form and shape are all really tiring ideas that they themselves have overused. Ultimately, in its short runtime, Blair Witch startles me a few times and that's about it. Still no Harry Masons. Sound design. The sound design was great. These drawn-out, haunted pieces sound ancient and evoke feelings of isolation and despair as you explore the forest, mixed with low rumbles and outdoor ambience, or lack thereof, and you've got what would have made a great atmosphere. The voices in Ellis's head all sounded pretty good through headphones too. Every leaf crunch and splosh as you stepped in a puddle sounded realistic enough. That's one Harry Mason. Gore. The tapes you find throughout the game mostly obscured any gore and any violent scenes, and even when Ellis was asked to rip the skin off of a deer's body to make a symbol, it was done off camera, which just felt odd, since there was a lot of detail put into the ripped apart body right in front of you. It's the jarring gore that's supposed to surprise the player, but seeing the corpses of two men I'd never seen alive didn't really hit home at all. A few mangled corpses of people and animals left laying around the forest were expected, really. Nothing like they described in the original film or anything that really seemed ritualistic like you'd expect, which was disappointing. That's still one Harry Mason.
In local news, there is still no sign of the 9-year-old Peter Shannon.
Story.
On Saturday afternoon,
Ellis goes into the woods with his service dog to help local search parties find missing boy Peter. After finding Peter's cap and following the trail, things suddenly go south as Ellis starts blacking out and experiencing hallucinations and time distortions. The game's subplot of Ellis's PTSD clashes hard against the vague paranormal goings-on in the forest and the abilities of his magic camcorder that turns back time, not to mention the killer on the loose. The story is a mess of a lot of different ideas that push the Blair Witch scenario to the back, and it all just seems so very unnecessary and doesn't fit in with anything the original Blair Witch Project established to begin with. It doesn't feel like the beings of the forest were messing with you as much as it felt like your character was falling apart under pressure that wasn't there. The final score, 1 out of 5 Harry Masons. Blair Witch starts off very promising, but by the later game becomes a steady downhill decline into a forced madness of weird mechanics, seizure-inducing visuals, and unnecessarily drawn-out sections with little to do but wander around and wait for it to end. I did not like this game. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I was confused and annoyed, I did not scream like a banshee or run away from the computer, and I advise you don't either. There'll be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching, and always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.